Fresh lemons. I think it's one of God's better creations, you know? I mean, there's nothing like a fresh lemon. Lemons on their own aren't really good. But don't give up on the potential these little babies have, because the truth is, there's nothing like fresh squeezed lemonade. I mean, it's a hot summer day, you come inside, somebody's poured you some fresh squeezed lemonade. It's great, but it's a pain to make. I mean, let's be real. You gotta cut the lemons, you gotta squeeze them, you gotta pour the water, you gotta put the sugar in, you gotta stir it around, you know what, when I describe it, it doesn't really sound like that much work, but it really is once you start doing it. That's why most people don't make fresh squeezed lemonade. I know I don't. I mean, if I want lemonade, I get it out of a can. 3 scoops, some cold water, and you're good to go. But it's not as good as the real stuff, you know? The real stuff, the way God intended lemonade to taste. In fact, you know what? Let's make some lemonade right here. I don't care if it's a lot of work. You got to cut your lemons, squeeze them into here. Oh, man. Ooh, I got a paper cut. Citrus, not so good on the open wound. You may want to wear goggles. I don't know. It's really burning. Okay, that's it. Dude, I can't squeeze all of these. Hand squeezing is really overrated. You might want to get yourself a juicer, and then you hand cut it, and then just right there on the juicer, and yeah, that's a lot easier. You know, we've all heard the saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And it's easier to smile about that saying or to tell somebody else that they should do that than to actually do it yourself, because it takes work. But that's actually a good philosophy in life. In fact, it's biblical. I mean, you look through, the whole Bible is filled with people who turn their defeats into victories. They turn their trials into triumphs. Instead of being victims, they became victors. Consider James chapter 1. That whole chapter is about turning lemons into lemonade. In a sense, James says that the trials and the temptations in life are lemons. And if we are overcome by our trials or we give in to our temptations, then we'll end up having a sour life that leaves a bitter taste in our mouth. But James goes on to say that we don't have to do that. We can be victorious. We can be just like the great people of the Bible. I mean, we can turn our lemons into lemonade. That's what the Bible says. All right. Okay, you know what? The Bible doesn't really even have the word lemons in it. I looked it up. But still, it works. I mean, think about this. Moses, he turned his staff into a snake. Jesus turned water into wine. God himself took dirt, and made humans. That's pretty amazing. I think it's easy enough to say that God is interested in taking things that seem useless and making something great out of them. And we have that same potential. The question is this. You can either let your lemons in life, your trials and your triumphs overcome you, or you can make lemonade. As for me, I'm interested in some lemonade. Looks just like what Grandma made. Cheers. I think I forgot the sugar.
So over the past few weeks, we have been journeying through the well-known and much-beloved story of David and Goliath, which I hope has been an encouragement to you. The challenger was a 9-foot-tall giant named Goliath, who looked to be the favorite in the battle. Then God chose David, a simple shepherd boy, to fight against Goliath. This battle required David to have a focus solely on his God. And finally, today, we get to celebrate that victory. Now, I remember when I was back in high school, the 1990 Cincinnati Reds. Yes, I'm going to tell a baseball story. You know, they call that team the wire-to-wire team. It was, you know, I remember I would sit and listen to the games with my great aunt Louise on the radio. She had a radio that's now in my house that I, you know, lucky enough that unfortunately it still works, but it doesn't pick up the radio station. But you know, we would sit and listen to the games, listen to the broadcasters, and you know, she is the biggest Reds fan that I think I've ever known. Second only to what I've been told about her husband, Uncle Lou. Now, I never got to meet Uncle Lou. He passed away before I was born. But, you know, I would have loved to have talked baseball with him, and especially that particular year. You know, anyway, you know, they were major underdogs in the World Series in 1990 against the powerhouse of the Oakland Athletics. Well, the Reds pulled off a shocking sweep thanks to, in part, the former Oakland pitcher, Jose Rio, who clamped down hard on his former teammates and took the series MVP award with a sterling game number 4 in Oakland. Pitching on 3 days rest after 7 innings of shutout baseball in game number 1, Rio got off to a rocky start in that game, compounded by first inning injuries to star slugger Eric Davis and standout Billy Hatcher. All the while, the A's got to him for a run on 2 hits and a walk to grab the early lead. Now, after he walked Ricky Henderson in the 2nd inning, Rio discovered he finally figured things out, kind of calmed down a little bit and got into his groove. And, well, he wouldn't allow another runner for the rest of the game, retiring 20 straight Oakland batters until he was taken out in the 9th inning with 1 out. Yet, the Reds, they found it pretty tough to score anything against Oakland starter Dave Stewart until they finally broke through in the 8th inning by scoring 2 runs on a bases-loaded, no-out scenario. Well, taking over for Jose Rio was Randy Myers, one of the most esteemed trio in baseball at the time, the Nasty Boys, as they were called, the best relievers in baseball who happened to be in the Cincinnati bullpen. Well, Randy Myers closed out the series by retiring the final 2 Oakland batters, including the great Jose Canseco. Now, I got to tell you, Cincinnati swept the A's in 4 games. Hadn't been done in a long time to win the 1990 World Series. It was a great time to be a Reds fan, especially growing up and in high school, because everybody I knew, well, they weren't Reds fans. They were all Braves fans. Shame on them. But anyways, everybody was celebrating the Reds bringing home the championship to Cincinnati. Parades and celebrations, everybody went crazy. You know, it had been 14 years since they had won a championship. It was a great time, great time. It reminds me, though, that, you know, we all need to celebrate victories in our lives. How great it is to celebrate victories, especially even more so in a spiritual sense. You know, we talked last week about how God has provided all that we need. And one of the things that God has given to us are the memories and the testimony of His provision and His goodness in our lives each day. And as we remember Him, we honor and we glorify Him with each and every victory. And so today, as we draw the story of David and Goliath to a close, I want us to look at David's victory. When the victory happened, when it was all said and done, what was the response? So let's take a look at that together. For the last time in our study, let's take a look at 1 Samuel 17. We're starting at verse 40. And it says there that he picked up 5 smooth stones, that is David, from a stream, and he put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armed with only his shepherd's staff and a sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walked out toward David with his shield-bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. "Am I a dog," he roared at David, "that you would come at me with a stick?" And he cursed David by the names of his gods. "Come over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals," Goliath yelled. David replied to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the army of Israel, whom you have defied. Today, the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. Then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us." Well, as Goliath moved closer to attack, David ran quickly out to meet him. Reaching into a shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling, and he hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and he pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. Now when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah gave a great shout of triumph and rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. The bodies of the dead and wounded Philistines were strewn along the road from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the Israelite army returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. Then David took the Philistines' head to Jerusalem, but he stored the man's armor in his own tent. Now, these are some pretty important verses that we've read today. And so I want to look at them, and I want to see three things that we can learn about the victory. First, I think we need to celebrate the victory. You know, one would think that leading, for example, a football team to a national title victory would give a sense of satisfaction and celebration. But Urban Meyer, the former coach of NCAA football champs, the Florida Gators, was depressed and empty after his team had won the 2008 title. According to an interview from ESPN, Meyer said after Florida won the national title, he couldn't and didn't enjoy the victory. He began recruiting literally minutes after the BCS title game ended with a 24-14 win over Oklahoma. He said, "I was in a panic situation. We just won it. We got to do it again." I closed the door and I started recruiting. One of his friends came to him and he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Enjoy. What's wrong with you? Enjoy this." And he said he tried. Now the context? Profound stress, including Meyer's hospitalization for unexplained chest pains. Now I'm not saying that in Meyer's case his stress and overwork outright prevented him from celebrating a victory, but isn't it interesting that even at a high moment in this man's career, he was unable to pause even long enough to look around and enjoy the moment? You know, sadly, many of us are so fixated on our goals and our insecurities and on the future that we can't enjoy we can't see the joy of the present. The sacred moments where Jesus meets us now. The moments of victory that he's given to us. Verse 52 of 1 Samuel 17 read, "Then the men of Israel and Judah gave a great shout of triumph." You know, when our favorite collegiate basketball team wins the NCAA tournament, what do? We celebrate. When our favorite NFL team wins the Super Bowl, what do? We celebrate. When our favorite Major League Baseball team wins the World Series, what do? We celebrate. And why not? Great things have happened. Maybe not in the grand scheme of life. Maybe they're just little things. But you know, there's certainly a moment in time when it feels great. And we should celebrate those things. David and the nation of Israel, you see, they had a victory. A major victory for that matter. They needed to celebrate that victory. God had been good to them. and God would be good to them again. God has been good to us, too. In our lives, we will experience victories over our enemy. The victory that we have just experienced, well, you know what? It'll become another arrow in our quiver against our future enemies and giants that will stand in our way. And as we have said, this victory will become one of those remembrances of our past that's going to help us in the future. So celebrate. Celebrate the victory. Take a moment to rejoice that the enemy was conquered. But you know, when celebrating, don't forget to give God the glory for the victory. As we've already noted a few times in our study, when God gives the victory, He deserves the glory for it. Too often, though, we become, because of our own egos, we try to take the glory for ourselves when the victory is won. Oh, you know what? I conquered and defeated the giant, we say to ourselves. Well, that's pretty arrogant, isn't it? Pride gets in the way. And you know what? If the devil, if he can't stop God from winning the victory in our lives, he's going to try to distract us from praising God for it. And so we get distracted and we become egotistical and we let pride come in of how good we are. But you see, it's just another example of why it is so important to keep our focus on God in every moment of the day. Verse 52 of 1 Samuel again said, "Then the men of Israel and Judah gave a great shout of triumph." The Hebrew word here for great shout it's a battle term. They had won. And it applies both to physical battles and spiritual battles that we face today. We should give a great shout to God. It's used elsewhere by David. Consider Psalm 108. David says, "Who will bring me into the fortified city? Who will bring me victory over Edom? Have you rejected us, O God? Will you no longer march with our armies? Oh, please help us against our enemies, for all human help is useless. With God's help, we will do mighty things, for He will trample down our foes." You see, David is asking the question, who's going to give us the victory? And he shares the answer in the final verse. With God's help, we will do mighty things. David was always focused on God. Are we? Do we believe that today? Do we believe that God will do mighty things in our lives? Do we trust Him to do great things? I think we're guilty of trying to fight our own battles on our own strength. We try to do it on our own. We try to take God out of the equation for a few moments, thinking that we're good enough and that we can do it on our own. But David never did that. David was focused on God. David knew full certain from where his help came from. In a very familiar psalm, David says, "I lift my eyes to the hills, or to the mountains. Where does my help come from?" Psalm 121, "My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." Because his help and strength came from God, it is to God to whom David and the Israelite army gave the credit, the glory, and the honor. Victories won by God deserve all praise to be given to God. Finally, our victory sends the enemy running. Did you notice that? Much of our discussion and so far has been all around the Israelite army and David and Saul, but what about the Philistines? Verse 51 gives us a glimpse into the immediate response of the Philistines after David's victory. And it says there, when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and they ran. The Bible says they turned and ran. Why? Because their champion was dead. You see, they lost their hope. I think this one phrase here, this one little snippet, deserves a bit of our attention for a moment. You see, when we put our faith and our trust in a person rather than Jesus Christ, we will eventually be let down. Maybe for you, it's a political leader. Maybe for you, it's a coworker. Maybe it's someone in our family. You know, having faith and trust in people is not all bad, but if those people begin to take God's place in our lives, we're going to suffer. We're going to suffer disappointment. We're going to be let down. That's why the psalmist said in Psalm 118, it is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. It's better to trust God than to trust men. The Philistines, you see, had put all of their hope and all of their trust in a man, their champion, instead of God. And they were defeated. When we stand against our giants, against our enemy, Scripture says we must put our trust and confidence in God. And when we do, our enemy will flee from us. You see, if we want to conquer our giants, if we want to send our enemy running, we must put our faith and trust in the only one who can lift us up, the only one who can give us the victory. James says it this way in James chapter 4, therefore, submit to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. See the difference? Cleanse your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament, mourn, and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Stories told about Lexi Fowler, who is like many sheep ranchers out in the West. She's tried just about everything to stop crafty coyotes from killing her sheep. She's used things like odor sprays, electric fences, and even things that look like that are supposed to scare coyotes off. And she has slept with her lambs during the summer and has placed battery-operated radios near them. She's corralled them at night, herded them during the day. But she's lost scores of lambs, 50 last year alone. Then she discovered the llama. The aggressive, funny-looking critter that's afraid of nothing. A llama. Fowler said llamas don't appear to be afraid of anything. When they see something, they put their head up, then they walk straight toward it. That's aggressive behavior as far as the coyote is concerned, and they won't have anything to do with it. Coyotes are opportunists, and llamas take that opportunity away. You know, the devil, our enemy, our giant, is a lot like those coyotes. He's opportunist. He's an opportunist. But if we are firm in our faith in God to give us the strength we need to resist temptation, then our enemy can be beaten. Remember what James said again? Submit yourselves to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. You know, the true victory, the kind ultimately won by God in our lives, should not send you and me running, but should send our enemy running, fleeing as quickly as he can to get away from us. And that's exactly what happened in David's story. The Philistines turned and ran. They ran as fast as they could. And you know what? That's exactly what will happen to you and me too in our lives. Now I warn you, the devil's not going to give up. Not until he is permanently punished at the end of the world. Until then, though, we can rest assured that the devil will run from us, even if it is for a short while, until a more opportune time comes back. He will run when God gives us the victory. You know, we're bringing our study of David and Goliath to a close, and just for a moment, I want to remember some of the main points we've learned along this journey. In our first week, we learned about the challenger that David faced. We learned that there are numerous parallels between Goliath, who Goliath was, and who the devil is in our lives. And understanding one, we can understand the other better. In our second week, we looked at David, a man after God's own heart, who in all things gave God the glory in his life. And throughout the story of David and Goliath, we see how David was completely dependent upon God and full of faith. He knew God would deliver him through each and every circumstance. Last week we saw how God had provided David all that he needed to be victorious in his battle against Goliath. And today we looked at David's victory and the responses to that victory. David's dependence upon God, well, that would continue throughout his life, except for a few circumstances. What was the secret behind his success as the future king of Israel? Could David have accomplished all that he did without God? No. David was focused on God. Just for a moment, let's reread just a short passage from 1 Samuel 17. David replied to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. Then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with the sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us." You see, the key here is the statement that everyone will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword, spear. The story of David and countless others throughout Scripture are stories of God using improbable people to accomplish extraordinary things. And you see, God does this so that there is no question as to who is responsible for that victory. There will always be Goliaths in our lives, I'm sorry to say. Maybe this morning, maybe you've been given a big bucket of lemons. Maybe you're struggling. Maybe you're hurting today. Maybe you're facing untold giants. Remember that God has given us everything we need for the victory. God has given us everything we need to take that situation and make lemonade from those lemons. We just need to remember to put our faith and our trust in him. And when we do, he will ultimately give us the sweet victory. Remember all that God has done today. Remember that all that God has already given you. Remember whose you are and who your God is. Don't lose hope. Don't give up. The battle belongs to the Lord, and the victory will be ours through his almighty hand.